Hi, I'm Bob Gross, and it's exciting to be conducting this conversation with Matt Witten from the Amherst class of 1979. I taught in American Studies and History at Amherst from 1976 through 1988. And Matt was in the very first seminar I led, American Studies 11, on what we then called Jacksonian America. For his first paper in that class, Matt, without asking permission, submitted a play in which he took the various figures we've been encountering in the readings and put them in dialogue with one another. The play was terrific, so much so that his classmates performed it for the other sections. And from that auspicious debut in the Pioneer Valley, Matt went on to write a play for his senior thesis, attend graduate school at Brandeis for a master's in theater, and then forge a career as a playwright, a scriptwriter for TV for such programs as House, Homicide, and Law and Order, and as a mystery crime novelist. From 1999 to 2003, he published 4 novels, all set in Saratoga Springs, New York, and the vicinity, which comprise the Jacob Burns series. Now, 18 years later, he's back with a new crime thriller, The Necklace, a fast-paced and emotionally gripping story of a mother in search of truth and justice for her daughter, who at age 7 was cruelly raped and murdered. That was 20 years ago in the Adirondacks region of New York. As the novel opens, the man convicted of this brutal crime has finally been scheduled for execution, and the mother, Susan Lentigo, a waitress in a small town just north of Saratoga, is getting ready to travel to the federal prison in North Dakota, where the sentence will be carried out. Susan has long anticipated the grim satisfaction that the death of the monster, as she calls the perpetrator, will bring. But in the course of her journey across the country, she stumbles on evidence suggesting that somebody else took her daughter's life. Everything she thought she knew comes into question. Instead of obtaining justice, she encounters uncertainties about the case and doubts about herself. Not until the last pages of the novel will the truth emerge, and from this experience, Susan Lentigo will be transformed. So Matt, can you tell us how you came up with the scenario for this novel and
Yes,
how you were?
yeah, I'd love to. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say how thrilled I am that you're interviewing me. Bob Gross was my favorite. You were my favorite professor at Amherst, and I still remember your lessons on how to teach. By which I mean, we used to write papers for you, and you used to write these, 3-page single-spaced comments on our papers that were longer than the papers themselves. And we were just amazed at this. And still to this day, 30, 35 years later, your ex-students still, whenever we get together, talk about your epic notes. And now I teach TV writing at UCLA Extension. And, I get these scripts and I give notes, and I give notes that are 3 pages long, single spaced. And sometimes I get so aggravated. Why am I spending this much time on it? This student is never going to be a TV writer. Why am I doing this? And I'll say, well, Bob did it, and I'm going to do it. And I've talked to other current professors who also do the exact same thing, write long notes, and were inspired by your love for teaching.
Oh, well, thank you. I should tell you a secret. If the paper's really bad, I don't write long comments. I
Well,
just say, come see me.
I should have learned that secret. And my wife often gets on my case. You got to take it easy. If it's someone that is, the script is never going to get great, just say, oh, good job, and give a few notes and let it go with that. So I'm still trying to learn that skill after teaching this class for 17 years now. But in answer to your question, what was your question? How did I get the idea?
So how'd you get the idea for this book? And once you got the idea, how'd you set about framing this and developing a plot and characters?
Well, in 2012, I was reading the Glens Falls Post-Star up in the Adirondacks, and they had a story about a woman who was holding a fundraiser at a local bar, Randy's Roost in Queensbury, New York, to raise money so that she could travel to North Dakota to witness the execution of the man who had murdered her daughter 20 years previously. And that just struck me so much. It just seems so moving to me. You know, first of all, obviously your daughter has been killed and you're still hoping for closure for that 20 years later. And also that she was so poor that she needed to raise money for this trip to North Dakota. She had some medical issues, so she couldn't fly. And so she needed to drive to North Dakota. So I thought this was an amazing character, just a fascinating story, snippet of a story. And I clipped out the article and I put it up on the bulletin board next to my desk in my office. And I had it there for 7 years. And I kept thinking about it, but I didn't know what the story would be. I thought, well, it's maybe some kind of artsy kind of road movie or road novel where she goes to North Dakota and she learns something on the way. But, you know, I wasn't really sure. So one day in 2019, I went out for coffee with my friend, John Henry Davis, who is a director and writer. And I said to John Henry, I've been thinking about this story for 7 years, but I don't know what to do with it. I'm trying to. And John Henry said, oh, I know what happens. I said, oh, please tell me. I've been waiting 7 years. And he said, the woman, the mother, is going to find something on her journey that makes her think maybe the guy who's about to be executed on Saturday, maybe he actually didn't do it. And I said, I don't know. I'm just not sure. I don't know. But by the next morning, I knew he was right. And so I started writing and I wrote the novel. As to how I did it, I just started at the beginning and kept going. And I'm in a writer's group that meets most Fridays. So I would come in and read a chapter out loud to people. Actually, there's a terrific actor in the writers group named Harley Jane Kozak, who starred in Arachnophobia and has been in a bunch of other movies and TV shows. So she would actually often read it out loud for me. So I bring in the chapter, she would read it out loud, and I would kind of hear the character through her voice. So, you know, I wrote it. It took me, I don't know, the first draft took me maybe 6 months, 7 months, whatever. And then after I did that, I said, you know, I think this would be a good movie. So I wrote the first draft of the movie. And when I wrote the first draft of the movie, that helped me understand even more how the characters really talked, how they really sounded when they talked. So then I wrote the second draft of the novel. And then when I wrote the second draft of the novel, I wrote the second draft of the screenplay. And writing the novel helped to teach me like more about the backstory of the characters. So when I wrote the second draft of the screenplay, that became deeper because I had written the novel. So then I now had, you know, this novel and this screenplay, gave the novel to my book agent, gave the screenplay to my movie and TV agent, and they both sold it simultaneously. It was incredibly awesome. The novel sold to Ocean View Publishing, and the screenplay sold to Leonardo DiCaprio's company, Appian Way and Cartel Pictures. So that's the long version of how I went about
Okay,
it.
so in your Jacob Burns series, your amateur sleuth is a stand-in for yourself. A, a writer who's got a lot of time on his hands to investigate crimes and knows around his town, father of 2 young boys, which you were at the time. And now you switch off to a female protagonist. And I wonder what challenges that have for you, especially since in The Killing Bee, Jacob Burns says, you know, after 10 years of marriage, women are still a mystery to me.
Well, I can now say after 35 years of marriage, women are still a mystery to me for sure. On the other hand, I would also say that men are a mystery. Um, you know, it had some challenge. I had some things going for me. One is that I've lived in the Adirondacks every summer for the past 30 summers ago or so. And before that, I used to live in Saratoga Springs for 9 years, and that is right near the Adirondacks in the foothills of the Adirondacks. So I kind of got to know a lot of people who were similar to my main character. And so she had many models, but she had several models of people who lived in that area that I thought of. When I thought of her, I thought of these people. So I knew them, to some extent. in terms of writing women characters, you just, obviously we live with women and we get to know women, and we just try to, know them the same way we would know everybody, and just try to understand people. And so I thought deeply about the character. I took long walks where I would think about the character, long bike rides where I would think about her, turn off my podcasts and just think about, what kind of music she likes, you know, what food she likes, just everything about her that I could imagine, just to fill out my conception of who she is. And then to make sure that I hadn't, sort of missed things, there are women in my writing group and my wife who read the novel and told me if I was going to screw up anywhere.
How about the
So that
social?
was,
Yeah. How
that's
about
the
this?
process of writing women character.
How about the change in social class? You writing yourself in Jacob Burns, have a college educated middle class guy. Maybe he's not making a fortune some of the times writing artsy plays, but he's still middle and privileged. And now you create a 55-year-old woman. She's a waitress in a small town diner. She's got to have a fundraiser to be able to get to North Dakota for the execution. What's involved in your thinking about social class and writing your characters?
I just cared about her. I just cared about her. I know a lot of folks like that up there, and I just did. I love her, and it's just as simple as that. And I can't really tell you why that is, but from the moment I read that newspaper article, it just hit me. This woman had no money. She had to raise $600 so she could get out to North Dakota, and it was interesting to me. And I read an article recently that said 54% of Americans, this is in the Times, I believe, New York Times, 54% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. It's amazing. And you never read novels about people that live paycheck to paycheck, or at least I don't. I read a lot of thrillers. I read thrillers like candy. And usually the main character in a thriller is a young woman in her 20s or 30s who works at a glamorous or seemingly glamorous job like publishing or entertainment or fashion, something exciting. And you don't really see characters in thrillers like the character in my book. And I was just interested in it. I just was. And I'll say, by the way, Bob, that I actually do have a history of this, in the sense that for my stage plays, I wrote a play about a homeless Native American man that I met in the streets of Brooklyn. The play was called Sacred Journey. And I also wrote a play about the homeless ex-cons who played chess in Washington Square. That's called Washington Square Moves. And I also, by the way, wrote a one-act play about two lesbians that got done at a couple of lesbian theaters in San Francisco and New York City. So I have a history. It's true that my first novels were all about me, but I have a history of writing about people that are very outside my experience. And I find it very interesting because the plays that I've done that are not about me directly, but are about people often of other ethnicities and certainly of other economic classes, are kind of the things I'm most proud of, the things that I think are my best work. And I like the Jacob Burns, so that would be up there too. Those novels are up there too. But in general, I love that. And I feel like those were kind of my biggest, contributions to society with my writing, were those things that I wrote. And it's interesting to me because it's very complicated, all the issues that arise now in many different ways when you're trying to write someone outside your experience, be it someone not of your gender or your ethnicity or your class. There's all kinds of things that come up. Anyway, I just try and have tried my whole career to just write what I'm most passionate about. And I found that whenever I write what I'm most passionate about, it does well. And whenever I try to make money, it doesn't.
Well, it's funny. I thought, it isn't just that Susan Lantiga is a small town waitress who's living from paycheck to paycheck. You set her on the road and you just strip her everything away. She's robbed, loses almost all the money she's got on her. She's scavenging for food that people have left behind in fast food restaurants. Poor woman. I mean, you've reduced her almost to a bag lady. So
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I wanted to make life really hard for her because then she could be courageous. Because to me, the novel is about a person who's really, really courageous. This woman, she's in her 50s and she's in a situation now where she's questioning everything that ever happened, everything she's always believed in her life, everything she believed about her marriage, about her daughter's death, about her ex-husband, about everything. She has to have the courage to face it and try to and try to and try to make things right. Try to figure out the truth before this guy does get executed Saturday at 5:30 in case he's innocent. So I tried to throw everything at her, and as you say, that included not having any money and not having the right connections, like most people that economic circumstance don't, not having the right connections and everything. So yes, I threw the
right.
kitchen sink at her.
And having to deal with people she's never met before. I mean, here's this small town girl who's spent her whole life in this really geographically narrow area. And that interested me to ask you about Saratoga in that region. Actually, Susan Lentigo, it takes her half the book to get out of New York State. And so she can barely leave. Now, I've spent my career studying Concord, Massachusetts, and Massachusetts and New England. You keep writing these novels about Saratoga. And so I wondered, why does that area appeal to you? What in your imagination does it grab?
When I lived in Saratoga, as I say, for 9 years, I wrote these murder mysteries, the Jacob Burns murder mysteries, set in Saratoga. And I have to cast my mind back to my mind when I was writing them 20 years ago. But I know that that I was very much writing, about myself, my story, as you say, very similar character to me. And one thing that appealed to me was I didn't have to do any research. I just knew my life ins and outs. So I knew what my wife was teaching at Adirondack Community College. I knew what my two little kids were doing, and I had my kids doing the same thing. So I didn't have to do any research. So what did appeal to me about it? I don't know. I just love the town. I just love the town. But I'll tell you what appealed to me about, you're asking about, Lake Luzerne and what appeals to me about it. Excuse me. I should say that the necklace takes place in Lake Luzerne, which is a half-hour drive, 35-minute drive from Saratoga, and it is a totally different world. I mean, Saratoga is a bedroom community for Albany, and it has its economic downturns, but it's tied to Albany, and it's been mainly doing fine. But Lake Luzerne it's a whole different kettle of fish. Lake Luzerne, many of the people there worked at the paper mill in Corinth, 6 miles away, and the paper mill started to shed jobs about 40 years ago. Until now, it has no jobs, 0 jobs. Every year, every few years, it would lose another couple thousand jobs, another couple thousand. So that and the rest of the manufacturing industry has gone the way it's gone in the entire country. So the people in Lake Luzerne are somewhat surviving on tourism now. But as I'm sure you know, tourism doesn't pay as much as manufacturing, and there are also fewer jobs. So these people have, lost, money over the past 40 years. And all the kind of social ills that you would think of in the United States have visited them. So when there was a meth epidemic in the United States, that hit them. When there was an OxyContin epidemic in the United States, that hit them. Suicide hits them. Drunkenness hits them. Just general poverty and early death rates for unknown reasons that are slightly unclear, hits them. And also voting for Trump hits them. Republican kind of ideology that, I think is detrimental toward their economic well-being, also hits them. So most of the people in Lake Luzerne vote for Trump. I forget the exact stats, but it was something like 70 or 80% voted for Trump. Unlike Saratoga, by the way, which voted for the Democratic candidates. So why do I love Lake Luzerne? I don't know. I just like the people. They're just doing their best. They're fighting. They're in a difficult circumstance. but you know, they're good people. They're just trying to get by with their families. They're trying to survive. They're, you know, cobbling together incomes, a little bit from tourism here, and then they get a little bit in the winter, you know, logging a little bit there, and they just struggle and they just fight. So I admire them. And the other thing I should say, by the way, is I also love the land of Lake Luzerne. I just love the lakes there. Lake Luzerne is the name of the town. It's named after a lake. And I love the lakes there and the hills and the trees and the mountains and the smell of the pine trees. Um, you know, I've been living in LA for 20, 25 years, and I do enjoy it here. But I'll tell you, when I go up to the Adirondacks and I go up and I smell those pine trees, it's like you take a deep breath and you go, oh, I'm home. You know, it must be how you feel about being in Concord and where you
Yeah,
are. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
this is home.
But I also think there's something to digging into a place that as you write about it, you don't exhaust it. You keep discovering new ways to deal with it. And what's so interesting here is that you've dealt with place and the challenges that the people in that place face, not through sociology, not through history, but through crime in mystery novels. And so I wondered why that genre appeals to you. What kinds of things can you do writing about crime, whether it's on Law and Order or homicide or in fiction, that you couldn't do in other genres?
You know, I think that the great thing about crime is that the stakes are always high. You know, if you're writing a thriller, somebody is about to get killed and you got to stop them. You know, and if you're writing a crime story, somebody you love, murder, somebody you love has been murdered, and you're trying to get justice for that person and closure for yourself. So the stakes are always just really high. So you start from that very high space. Um, and uh, you know, sometimes if I read like minimalist fiction or I don't know, the kind of thing that's in the New Yorker, sometimes I go like, I'm just don't care enough, you know. And a crime novel for me, I'm just speaking for me. For me, I just care more. I guess, you know, the classic explanation for why people enjoy murder mysteries is because, you know, the world is messed up, it's wrong, there's something screwy about it, you got to fix it. And then at the end, our hero solves the crime, the bad guy goes to prison, order is restored, and we have justice again. So that probably appeals to me too. That's probably for me as well. That's one of the things that appeal to me about crime fiction. Um, Crime fiction is, you know, it's about right and wrong and good and evil, and it's about all the gray areas. And and
And
I like it.
some people have said it's intrinsically conservative as a genre because it comes to a false closure. There's justice is done in an unjust world. In your novels, it's interesting how much you distrust the police and the authorities, you know, who are always looking for an easy way to close a case and to ignore the evidence that is at odds with that, or they impose their stereotypes of other people and decide who they can believe and who they can't instead of really getting to it. So I wonder, do you see yourself doing political work in writing these fictions?
You know, it's funny, just to talk about the police first. You know, I have tremendous respect for the police. I think they have an incredible job, a difficult job. You know, I can't imagine being in some of the situations that they're in. So I have tremendous, you know, sympathy, you know, for what they're going through. So God bless them. But you know, I did grow up, you know, in the late '60s, early '70s, and I had this anti-authoritarian streak and you know, liberal streak, and so yeah, you're going to be like a little negative about any kind of authority figure, and so I guess I've always been drawn to stories, you know, about bad cops and or I guess in this case, dumb cops. You know, I mean, not dumb. That's not the right word, but wrong cops. So, for instance, in the Sherlock Holmes novels, that's also going way back to any kind of amateur sleuth or private investigator novel. It's always that the cops are just a little bit wrong for some reason. So I guess I've been drawn to that, you know, more so. I've written some cop shows, but I've been drawn personally more toward private investigator novels or works of art or amateur investigators. I'll tell you one funny story and then I'll answer your question, which is I was writing for Law and Order when September 11 happened. And, you know, my favorite kind of story to do when I was a writer at Law and Order, and I got to do several of them, I think, was, you know, about crooked cops. Yeah, right. I am kind of drawn to that. So, and I know I had one that I was about to propose to the head writer of Law and Order right when September 11 happened. So he called me into his office and he said, "What's your idea?" And I said, "Well, I was going to pitch you a dirty cop story, but I have a feeling that's not going to go in this show right now or in this country because people wanted to believe in our New York police officers and so on." And I kidded to him, and then the other story I really want to do is about a fireman who's like a child molester, which would have been totally opposite anything.
Yeah, out of the
Anyway,
frying pan into the fire.
yeah, even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, the country and Law and Order took a little bit of a conservative turn there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So do I view myself as having some kind of, political or social effect on the world, my books? I would say that, without doing a spoiler on the necklace, I would say that, inherent in the story, what is that one questions the capital punishment. So that's inherent in the story. And, in my other books, in one of the Jacob Burns books, I knock off a school principal. And that was inspired by a school principal that our sons had. And, it was just about schools. It's weird because I wrote this book 20 years ago, and so the issues are so current that they were about standardized testing and how annoying that is. They were about not having sufficient programs for kids who have reading disabilities, and about not sufficient programs for kids who are intellectually gifted. So I had that. So I think each of my books, I have something that I care about, and my plays about the homeless Native American man and the homeless ex-cons were also kind of it was just look at folks. It was just, these are some folks that one should take seriously. Look at them. Don't just pass them by. Just think about them and think about what's going on in their lives. And I guess in general, what I think about art is that we're not necessarily going to change people's opinions, but we are going to put issues or people up there for people to look at and for people to care about and think about. So we're going to put something into the conversation. And that's what I think art can do, is really put it up there.
Well, I think what's so interesting in the necklace is I certainly thought of this as, you could maybe view it as an anti-capital punishment novel, but you didn't begin there. It's how you develop the story. And I wanted to just shift this a bit, because thinking back to your American Studies major and what you learned from that, I was struck by the fact that you take this small town waitress who's barely been anywhere, you send her on the road, she's robbed, she's got no money, she's cut off from every, she's got to deal with a whole bunch of new people. And she's reduced to basically her own will and determination. And I thought, a classic American Studies figure who goes west to throw off all of Eastern world of relationships and has to reinvent yourself. And you know this because you have the teenage rebel girl say to her, listen, trust yourself. The classic Emersonian line. So I thought, this is the American Studies mystery crime thriller.
You're right. You're right. I love that. I totally love that. That's great.
And your first paper was on, you kept mining Cooper's The Pioneers.
Oh my goodness, that is so cool. By the way, I was really intrigued what you said in your intro about nobody would call it the Jacksonian age anymore. And yeah, of course, we don't want to define it by that because of there's a new view on him. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So let's wrap up to a couple of things. One is really is a lead into how do you think you've drawn on your education at Amherst and in American Studies in your writing career?
Well, obviously, I drew on it more than I knew. I guess I would say that I don't know how to put this in a non-corny way, but whatever. I've always been interested in America. I've always been interested in it, and I think that's, I don't know. I don't know that I'm different from other people in that regard, but I think about it a lot, our sociology, our history, and I'm sure that was a lot of it I learned from taking the American Studies class, and a lot of it was deepened by taking the American Studies class. I actually went on a walk with a friend today, and I was talking about you and your two books, and he said, "So what is transcendentalism?" He just didn't know, so I was calling back on my memories of your classes and giving my best description. And what you said about, be yourself, just now, trust yourself. I described that to him as the main tenet of transcendentalism, and quoting Emerson for him. So I'm glad to hear that I have some memory of it. So I guess I guess that's the truth of it, is that it's there. It's just very much in me, for sure.
Well, do you think this will be my last question as we wrapping up here? Amherst College has produced a remarkable group of mystery and crime writers: Dan Brown, Scott Turow, Chris Bojalian, Harlan Coben, and you. Got any thoughts on why the Pioneer Valley breeds so many people dreaming about murder and tales of crime and injustice? Anything there in College Hall or Converse that you think might promote thoughts of knocking someone off and getting away? Maybe it's that Amherst thinks that the students at Amherst are smart enough to get away with it.
When I was at Amherst, I actually wrote a paper on the ghost tales of Mount Holyoke College. So maybe that inspired me. Yeah, it's, I know Harlan. Harlan's a great guy. I haven't met the other folks. I don't know. I mean, if I were to talk about Amherst, I would say, you can dream at Amherst. Amherst is out in the country. It's not as big the hubbub of the city. And I do feel like maybe people in Amherst get more time to literally dream, and to and just to be quiet and think about things. So I would say one of the benefits of Amherst is it's a small town college, and then you get a chance to explore what's in your heart, and maybe, I don't know. I think there might be something in there that helps creativity. I do believe that.
Well, I was awfully lucky to have students like you from my very first class on. So you didn't get Terry Gross, but you got Bob Gross. So it's been great talking with you and
Great talking to you
being back
again.
in the Connecticut Valley virtually.
Yeah, it's great talking to you again. I was very fortunate we all were to have you as a professor at Amherst.
Well, thank you.